cranked it up.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, meeting number 476, Lake George Park Commission. Michelle, do we have a quorum? We do have a quorum. Thank you. Everyone received a copy of the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any additions, subtractions?
I move we accept the minutes as presented.
There's one typo in there, but I'll bring it up later. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Same thing, fiscal actions report. You all had a copy of that. I'm sure you read it cover to cover.
I have a question.
Sir.
Where's Erica?
She's not here.
She's holding down the office.
A name jumped out at me when I was looking at accounts payable. One is David Becker, the other one is Becker David. And I was just wondering what kind of business we are doing with this name that appears in the
Good question.
paper.
Good question. Why don't you make a motion that we approve the fiscal actions report with the
$40, $50.
excuse me, sir. Sir? Excuse me.
Have to talk loud.
Would you like to make a motion that we approve the fiscal action report
Yes,
pending an explanation of the Decker item in the statement? You want that on there?
That's good. I'll talk to Erica.
Actually, I can confirm that. He wanted a reimbursement of his boat sticker because he's looking to sell his boat.
Are they both the same person?
Did you get your
No,
answer?
the Dave Decker. That's his registration sticker for his boat. He wanted a refund because he wasn't putting his boat on the water this year.
You got your answer.
Yeah, so moved to.
We're good.
So we're approving the fiscal action report.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Nothing is easy today. Project review actions report.
Resolution 2018-32. Whereas the Commission has received and reviewed the Project Review Action Report prepared by the state staff and dated July 10, 2018. Whereas the Project Review Committee recommends acceptance of the Project Review Actions Report. Now therefore be resolved that the Commission directs that the Project Review Actions Report be incorporated in the minutes of the full Commission meeting. So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the project review actions report. Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. No projects this month. Therefore, we're going to go to a award given to a couple of our hero law enforcement officers, and I will ask the chairman of the Law Enforcement Committee, Mr. Parker, to do it because he likes his picture in the paper. You're on.
Well, I just lost my agenda. I don't have an agenda, Bruce.
Coming down.
Today we're going to award Marine Patrol Officer Robert Suffin the Officer of the Year Award, and we have somebody here from Parks who, Joe, would you introduce, please?
Officer of the Year Award.
Officer Robert Suffin's relentless efforts have contributed significantly to the overall boating safety. In New York, we recognize that the key to reducing boating fatalities is a two-pronged approach, involving a strong enforcement presence combined with rigorous efforts to educate the boating public. In 2016, Lake George was the tragic site of a boating accident resulting in the passing of 8-year-old Charlotte McHugh. The subsequent investigation revealed that alcohol and drugs have been a major contributing factor. 2017 brought about a heightened focus on removing impaired operators from the water. The Lake George Park Commission sought out additional training to assist officers with identifying impaired operators. A new night patrol was established in a joint effort between the Park Commission and the Warren County Sheriff's Office. All these efforts resulted in 19 total DWI arrests in Lake George, a significant increase from the prior. Amongst all these efforts, one such officer stood apart. Officer Sukven alone made 7 BWI arrests, and it was the assisting officer in an aide. On August 11, 2017, at about 10:15 p.m., Officer Sukven, along on his patrol boat, was proceeding north in the Hague area when he noticed someone shining a spotlight at him. When he stopped the vessels, 3 of them rafted together, he found 15 individuals, all under the age of 21. Officer Sukven noticed a large amount of alcohol in these boats and ultimately seized 78 full beers and 2 bottles of liquor from the underage occupants. One vessel attempted to leave the scene several times, and that operator ended up being arrested for BWI. Had it not been for Officer Sukven's actions, these 15 teams would have consumed nearly 80 beers, 2 bottles of liquor, and operated the 3 vessels on the water, creating a great risk to both them and anyone else they may have encountered. Instead, the outcome was much different. The one individual was arrested for BWI, and all the other teams were brought safely to shore, where they were turned over to their parents. In the boating safety and enforcement community, we are all committed to the challenge of preventing accidents and saving lives. It is truly impressive to see or hear about a member of our community whose heroic actions have saved someone's lives. These actions often receive the attention they rightly deserve, and we all share in their celebration. It is equally important, however, to recognize and celebrate the immeasurable number of lives saved each year through the tireless efforts of officers truly dedicated to preventing their loss with diligent enforcement. Officer Sukven is one such officer. His unwavering devotion has contributed immensely to the safe boating cause of the New York State. His actions reflect tremendous credit upon himself, the Lake George Park Commission, and the entire marine law enforcement community. It is with great pleasure, on behalf of the National Association of State Boating Law Administrators, who represent marine patrols from across all 56 states and territories, as well as Canada, and on behalf of New York State, I recognize Officer Robert Sukven of the Lake George Park Commission as the 2017 New York State Boating Officer of the Year.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's the best accepted speech we've ever gotten. You want to read the resolution from the commission?
I will. I'm going to go up and make these guys stand up and listen to their good deeds. We're going to present a life-saving medal award to Sergeant Angelo Passion and Marine Patrol Officer Pete New. Want to step right up, gentlemen, please? We'll be ready to bring in. Whereas the Lake George Park Commission's Marine Patrol is as an integral part of the Commission's efforts to preserve, protect, conserve, and enhance the natural scenic beauty of Lake George, and to provide for the education and safety of the public in compliance with the New York State navigation law and the Commission rules and regulations. And whereas Marine Patrol Officer Sergeant Angelo Passione and the Marine Patrol Officer Lake Park Commission with the Lake George Park Commission, Marine Patrol, and the valued members of the patrol. And whereas on July 15, 2018, at approximately 5:30 p.m., Sergeant Passione and Patrol Officer Snoop responded to Boone Bay for a reported emergency traffic. And whereas upon arrival, Sergeant Passione and MPO Snoop found the victim was face down in the water for 3 to 5 minutes on the dock after being pulled from the water by guests, staff, and resort. And whereas after finding no pulse, Sergeant Passione and Patrol Officer Snoop started CPR, switching back and forth. Whereas the victim had a pulse and was breathing upon the arrival of EMS. And whereas if not for Sergeant Passione and Patrol Officer Snoop's quick and decisive actions throughout the entire incident, the victim surely would have died. And now therefore be it resolved that the members of the Lake George Park Commission and staff offer Sergeant Angelo Passione and Marine Patrol Officer Pete New the life-saving medal in recognition of the courage, bravery, and extraordinary act in service to the Commission, to Lake George, and to the community. And that resolution has been moved and adopted by the Park Commission, and I have for you having no real idea where it is.
Not in his skin.
Yeah, that is your.
You're supposed to just go. That's where they see it's good. Their pins. That's true.
Right hand up, please. All right. With or without steps. Okay, I thereby commend. Thank you. I think we have some good news about the victim also this morning.
Yeah, the last we've heard, the victim in this near drowning was awake. He was failing. So, wow. They did a great job. He was basically dead when they arrived. They brought him back. So it doesn't happen often. So we wrote out this was well served.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How about covering Log Bay, since this is a day for law enforcement? Just as a matter of record, just about there isn't anybody in Lake George who isn't familiar with Log Bay Day, and Log Bay Day, and last year was the first time that we had gotten really good at stopping what was happening there, and we're going to continue it this year. And I would like you to read the resolution, which you don't have, and now you have.
And you might have the resolution for the Log Bay Day Law Enforcement Committee report. Does anybody have that?
Do this first, please.
Yes, sir. Resolution 2813-33, subject, resolution authorizing the Lake George Park Commission Marine Patrol to close Log Bay and Shelving Rock Bay for Monday, July 30th, whereas the Lake George Park Commission is established by Article 43 of the Environmental Conservation Law to preserve, protect, and enhance the unique natural scenic beauty of Lake George, and to regulate the use of the lake for appropriate specified purposes. And whereas Log Bay Day was a past, unofficial gathering that was held on the last Monday of July in Shelving Rock Bay and Log Bay, and the event had become disruptive, dangerous, and a threat to the public safety and health and welfare of Lake George and its users. Now therefore be it resolved that Log Bay Day and Shelving Rock Bay, that Log Bay and Shelving Rock Bay shall be closed to the motorized boating public on the last Monday of July, and no motorized vessels shall be allowed to access to those bays from sunrise to sunset on such day. And be it further resolved that the Lake George Law Enforcement Director, the Executive Director, staff, and council are hereby authorized to take any lawful measures to enforce this directive. And be it further resolved that the Lake George Law Enforcement Director, the Executive Director, staff, and council shall cause all relevant state and local agencies to be notified of this resolution. And that is a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to continue with our efforts to curtail Log Bay Day. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Another one for you.
We had a law enforcement committee meeting starting at 9 a.m. this morning. Lieutenant Joe Johns discussed with us some equipment changes, which includes a receipt of a 2018 24-foot Boston Whaler from Parks and Rec, New York State, in exchange for a smaller boat that they wanted to move somewhere else. We accepted the new boat. We talked about the items that we just discussed with the Marine Patrol officers. We discussed some, in executive session, some specific enforcement actions, and we then adjourned. Resolution 2018-34, whereas the Law Enforcement Committee met July 24, 2018 to review matters pertaining to the Lake George Park Commission's Marine Patrol and the Commission's Law Enforcement Program, and whereas active law enforcement cases and their status were reviewed in executive session, and whereas the Law Enforcement Committee has reported on the results of that committee meeting at this full commission meeting, and whereas the Law Enforcement Committee recommends acceptance of this month's law enforcement report, now therefore be it resolved that the Commission accepts the report of the Law Enforcement Committee, and that is a motion.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the the Law Enforcement Committee report. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. We have no projects, but we do have an important public information session right now, and it concerns something that the Park Commission has been involved in for a year and a half now, and that's a mandated review and possible revision of our stormwater regulations that have been in effect for 2 decades now. The potential changes, some of which increase the protection for the lake, and some of which actually lighten some of the burden that has been placed on the public, because with the increased study we've had of Lake George, we found out that some of the restrictions were perhaps a little more severe for the amount of return we got. So we are actually asking for some reduction in some of the restrictions in order to ease the burdens placed on the homeowner. These proposed revisions to the regulations, as I said, we've been talking for a year and a half. We've talked with all of the local supervisors, the planning boards, the Chamber of Commerce, local businessmen, just about environmental groups, just about, and a number of attorneys from the state of New York. That's the big outfit down in Albany that has a certain amount of control over us. And we've discussed these extensively. This is the first time that we've gone out to the general public, and we will be putting on a presentation of the rules and regulations that are in effect, what they have accomplished over the last 20 years, and ways in which we think that they can be improved. I think that the amount of study that's been going on in Lake George in the last 20 years has given us a great deal of insight into a, shall we say, scientific method of protecting the lake. There has been almost universal, as far as I'm concerned, acceptance of these changes, both from the fact that they're going to improve the protection of the lake and that they're going to ease the burden on the homeowner considerably, I think. The only people, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I'll say it, the only people who objected to this are people who haven't read it, which seems to be a common malady suffered by the public and government in general. We've got to pass it before we can read it. In this case, we much prefer that the public knows entirely what's happening through the whole process. And for that reason, we're going to give a complete presentation today. Dave has prepared a very nice presentation, slide presentation that's pretty obvious as to what's going on in the lake and what we can do to help it. I will ask at this point the chairman of the Project Review Committee, well, you're not really Project Review, you're the Stormwater Revision Chairman.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I would ask you to give the public a brief, and I said, you know that word, you know that word, brief? Yeah, okay, a brief rundown on exactly what you've been doing for a year and a half.
Covering for you in the wintertime. Other than that, when we started the process and we started digesting out what we wanted to do and most importantly, what we didn't want to do. And the first thing that we decided that what we wanted to do was to partner, quote unquote, with as many of our stakeholders that would have an interest in this. And we sat down and we made a list of these folks, and it included all of the municipalities bordering Lake George. It included the business groups that were involved in it, the forestry group, the loggers, that kind. And we did do that all winter long. We had many meetings at their locations, at our locations. In the afternoon, at 7 and 8 o'clock at night. And we went to all of the communities. We met with some of the town boards. We met with the planning boards of those communities that had them. We got stuck up in Putnam almost one night with a blizzard storm. And so we went around. And we had important input from folks. And we took the input, and where it was useful, or that's a very poor word, where it helped us, we actually changed our document as we went along. Before we even started all this, there was a local contractor, a forester type fellow. He called and said, hey, can I come talk to you about it? I read it. And he sat with us just as we're getting the project underway. And the first thing we did was take his major suggestion and incorporate it and revise our document. It was just that important. And that's what we cared. We met with the foresters, we met with the professional foresters. All of a sudden, they were saying, and they had, their only objections was the changing of a word here or there that they thought more closely defined what we were trying to do and what would be more aesthetically acceptable to them and their membership. One fellow suggested, well, we really need to talk to the men on the road, the loggers, the ones that would be affecting some of these stormwater issues. And We sat there and said, well, how do you get that? You know, the only time you see them is when they're passing you on the road. And we found somebody with a list of these loggers and where they were coming from and going to, and operating in, and remembering these folks are operating in the park and out of the park. And of course, our regs in the park, but we didn't want to make the regs so onerous that they couldn't easily comply. That's the situation, was the ease of the folks that had to obey the regs to be able to obey them. No tricks, all transparent. And I think that's where we've come to today. Have I skipped over any of the big highlights?
No, I think that's a good summary.
We'll get on.
Okay,
I'll get them a chance.
all right.
You all done?
I'm brief.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. Now I'd like, because people always have a question about the timing behind this and the process, I know that the press always does, so I would ask Carla to give a brief rundown on the legal process we have to go through and the timing.
Sure. As a state agency, the Park Commission is required to abide by the State Administrative Procedure Act and work with the Governor's Office and the Office of Budget, Department of State, to pass any amendments or any new rules or regulations. It is a fairly lengthy process involving quite a few machinations of different offices and different attorneys and different directors. I know that there's been some questions with respect to why the actual regulations, the language is not before you. Under SAPA, we are not permitted to provide the language until it is published in the state register. That's a decision that is going to be made by Albany fairly shortly. The minute they say you can release these and they're published, then they will be released. We work with the Governor's Office and Governor's Council's Office to make sure of the authority. We work closely and have been working closely with DEC and the APA because under our Article 43, we have to work in consultation with them, and ultimately DEC and the APA have to approve the stormwater regulations. So there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So what we're moving forward at this process is submitting all of the regulatory documents to Albany, including the text. We hope to hear a response from them very shortly that we can go and publish it in the state register. Once it is published in the state register, there's 60 days for you to present further comment. At the end of the 60 days, we will hold a public hearing at which further comment will be given to the commission. 5 days after that, the commissioners will be able to review all the comments, revise any documents that may be necessary, receive approval from DEC and the APA, and then ultimately move forward with adoption of the regulations. At this point, we're looking at a early fall public hearing because we are required to not hold the actual hearing until 60 days after it's been published in the state register. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to shorten that time. That's one of the reasons that the commissioners decided to hold public information sessions so that this can all be before you and give you extensive time to comment on the concepts at this stage and the rules and regulations once they are published. The ultimate goal is to have the regulations in effect January 1st of 2019. Does that work for you?
That works for me. I might emphasize again what Carla said. We're restricted to a certain extent that we cannot give you the exact printed document. However, that does not prevent us from giving you probably what's easier to understand, a layman's explanation of exactly what that document contains and what it requires to be done. And I appreciate the fact that we have not circumvented the law, but we've certainly made it easy to get this information out, which is not something that always happens. And I'm very grateful to Dave Wick and Ken Parker for the work they've done for the last year and a half to contact just about anybody that wants to hear about this. Dave has offered to talk, go anywhere, to give a complete explanation so that nobody's going to be surprised by this that has an interest in it. And that, I will turn it over to Dave for the rest of the presentation. He's done a really nice slide presentation. I think that you might even enjoy it and stay awake.
Maybe, but there's no guarantees ever of that. You guys, so you guys want to slide.
Back here it says.
Yeah, as long as it's on that, I think. So thank you for coming. This is great. I see some northern folk and some southern folk. It's going to take about 20 or 25 minutes to kind of roll through a few things. For those of you who don't get down south, this is the village of Lake George, the English Brook Delta, and it's been growing over the years because it's growing for a while. This is kind of a picture of it. And if you take a look, this is the village right here. And this is about 60,000 cubic yards of sand and silt sediment that have come into Lake George. It started with construction of the Northwest, but it's built up as the village and everything else is built up around it. But here's what you don't see. You don't generally see underwater the benthic algae that comes in as a result of directly into it. So what are we doing? How are we taking a look at this and trying to control the growth of some of these things? So somewhat on water quality. These pollutants, this is actually across the street from my house. This is yesterday. This is a lot of all this stuff. Phosphorus, nitrogen, sediment, fluoride, all of these take a look at what is coming off of the land. And the study hands down the number one water quality impact and the future detriment of Lake George is somewhere runoff from developed and developing areas. Now, this predates the Lake George Park Commission as a state agency. Shortly after that, the plan for the future of the Lake George Park came in, and that was really kind of the document that said, you know, we really need to have the Park Commission not be a shell organization anymore. It was a Marine Patrol for many years. We turned it into a state agency and started to get some regulations in place, started to get some programs in place to try to do better for Lake George. Stearns and Wheeler report looked at the phosphorus budget for Lake George, and then looked at this, a 30-year study of Lake George. history of Skaneateles Lake. So this is Skaneateles, right through here, and these were prevalent along the shorelines. So Skaneateles Lake has similar water clarity to Lake George, anywhere between 20 and 40 feet. This dock right here is 4 inches, and that is 1 year that they came in and had these. And so it is a scramble. This was really what got the governor involved and said, if this can happen in Skaneateles Lake, let's take a look and find out what we can do to try to protect our water bodies a little bit better. So what he did, we went through collectively, took a look at those 12 lakes, and he's dedicated $65 million towards trying to put programs in place to prevent these harmful algae blooms from coming in place and try to manage the ones that already exist. Lake George is currently the only lake out of 12 that he's studying that has never had a harmful algae bloom. Our goal is to make sure it never happens on Lake George. So the Commission in Stormwater Management, Stormwater Runoff Management was, from my perspective, reading the 1987 plan, the primary reason that the legislature decided this commission should really become a state agency and they should actually have some teeth and they should start doing things proactively. They put regulations in place back in 1990. This is 13 years before DEC even considered the regulations that they have for stormwater. And our stormwater regulations are considerably tighter than the regulations that are statewide. So I was at a couple of public meetings when the town of Lake George and town of Queensbury were putting in the MS4 stormwater program, and a guy I've known forever, Michael Andrews, stands up and says, you know what, we get what you're doing, but all this is coming from the state. What is the state doing? What are the counties doing? And what's the county doing to address all this issue? I said, that's a great question. I have 20 years of my life doing exactly the answer to that question, so I'm going to go through a couple of things and talk about what is happening in public infrastructure to try to protect the water bodies and do better for stormwater management. This is a project, actually I designed years ago. This is the village of Lake George. This is Tony Abrante's cutting edge construction. So it's the biggest parking lot in Lake George Park, and all of that, every time it rains, goes right into drive inlets, straight after this into the lake. And we said, why don't we see if we can get that water back into the ground? And that's the whole premise of stormwater management. If you can get the water into the ground, then the soil will filter those pollutants, will absorb the phosphorus, and simply remove it from the system. Cleaner water goes to the ground, and water flows out to our streams and our lake. That's the general premise of everything that we're talking about. And there's been a number of these. Things as simple as dry wells. We put over 40 dry wells in the village of Lake George, all through grants that were secured through the Department of State and DEC, and they're all installed by town highway departments on their own dime. So it's been a great partnership. This is a multi-million-dollar stormwater wetland project that involved municipalities, the Lake George Association, the Fund for Lake George, a number of others. And it's a cutting-edge system here, and this is the Westbrook Park on the north. So there can be some creative solutions to doing better for public infrastructure improvements. This is kind of a groundbreaking effort. This is the beach road down in the village of Lake George. When the county said we're going to put $6 million into completely reconstructing the road, we had the crazy idea of saying, let's make it a pervious pavement. So right now, everything on Beach Road is simply going to flow straight out of the water. We said, why don't we see, we just went to a stormwater conference, and they said, we found some applications where you can do highway level pervious paving. And so the county DPW, Jeff Tennyson at the time, said, I'm willing to listen, let's talk about it. So we got a grant to help them offset the cost, increased cost for pervious pavement. It only ended up being 9% more total cost. This ended up being a $6.2 million project. And this is what they did. It's basically what improve their infrastructure and make it better for water quality in the town. So I really think always so it's not directly somebody on our issue. This is see a lot of stuff about supporting it. A lot of different there's been some studies done that say water supervisors, highway superintendents, town councilmen, and everybody else involved. So that's positive. That's a whole separate story. Anyway, back to stormwater. We've heard the public park. We've heard a little about salt. We want to talk about stormwater regulations for development in Lake George Park. That's what we're talking about today. We were enacted in 1990, updated in 1998, so we haven't taken a look at our stormwater regulations in 20 years. Theoretically, we're required to look at all regulations every 5 years. That's simply impossible for every agency out there, but this is important enough. Once we finish our invasive species program, we wanted to jump into stormwater. Wanted to do a thorough review. Our regulations doing the job that they need to do. And I think from our overall assessment of our program, the stormwater regulations are good, but are they good enough to take a broad look and make that level of protection what it needs to be? So these are the existing provisions. This is what's on the books today, on the books for 30 years. A minor stormwater project is you disturb 5,000 square feet or more of land surface, you need a stormwater permit in the Lake George Park. So the Park Commission administers jurisdiction in 5 towns, and 4 towns actually administer our own jurisdiction. Towns of Queensbury, Bolton, the Village of Lake George, and the town of Lake George take our regulations, they put them on their books, and their staff administers our regulations. A major stormwater permit is 15,000 square feet or more, so that's about a third of an acre. By contrast, DEC kicks in at 1 acre for erosion control and 5 acres for stormwater management. We don't have projects that size in the Lake George Basin, so the DEC regulations aren't generally applicable for what we're looking at. And it's simply for the quality of the resource that we have, they're simply too broad to have real value for what we're looking at. The goal, written into Article 43 of the Conservation Law, no new net discharge from the village. That was a goal that was set forward back in 1990. We haven't gotten there. We'll talk about why. Promote infiltration wherever possible. We have great soils all throughout the park with the exception of Walton. Ticonderoga. Ticonderoga is our challenge because a lot of clay soils up here, but there are some good solutions that we're working on. So we talk about bending the curve. So the curve, we're seeing this decline, right, of water quality slowly. What we want to do is flatten that curve off and say, if we can do some reasonable proactive efforts, let's see if we can slow or stop that decline. That's what we're going for. How do we do that? We have some existing regulations we're going to tweak, and we're looking to put a couple of new things in place. Timber harvesting is existing. Retrofitting of properties is new, and we're going to talk about that. Setbacks for better projects is new. Stream buffers was talked about historically, more of a stream corridor provision, but this is the stormwater practice we're going to talk about. And then lastly, fertilizer restrictions. It's in place in a couple of towns, and we think it makes sense. So how did we come up with these? As Vice Chairman Parker noted, we went out to everybody, started with the towns, and then met with everybody and said, this is what we're thinking about. Does it make sense for you to administer? Does it make sense for your constituents? Is this where we need to be? Is it too strong? Is it too weak? What do you think? And after all those conversations and back and forth after the fact, I believe that we have the support of all the towns in Lake George for the package that we have today. However, the towns are one part of the package, the local individuals, the citizens of Lake George Park are the other. So we want to have this conversation. So we're going to go through each of the 5 fairly quickly. Then we'll have a lot of time for questions and answers at the end. So timber harvesting. We have timber harvesting regulations in Lake George Park. They've been on the books since 1990. They are not well known and they're not well followed. So the reason that they're not well known and followed is the commission outsourced the review and approval authority to another agency, my old agency, Warren County Soil and Water Conservation. And there's a disconnect because Warren County Soil and Water is up in Warrensburg. There isn't always a direct line of contact, and what we find more often than not is enforcement cases as opposed to compliance. Our whole goal is to have Steve Vermont, if he's coming in to do a logging job, say, here's my one-page plan. I know I have a stream coming across. I have a permit to go across the stream. And at the end of the day, I'm going to seed and mulch this. I'm going to put a couple water bars in, and I'm good to go. That's all you need to do for a timber harvest operation. There's no permit fee. There's no permit. It's simply an approval of an erosion control plan. That's in place today. We want to bring that back in-house, and we want to increase outreach to all the loggers that are working in the area. No permit required. Some people were saying, why don't you go to a full permit and a review process? We don't think that's necessary for what we're looking at, because really, it's an exemption from our stormwater regs as long as you have a conservation plan approved by Soil and Water or now the Village Park Commission. The whole idea is they just don't understand. And that's going to be our job to make sure we're outreaching them. If you already have a conservation plan on that property, you're good to go. There is no further activity. You simply submit what you have to the commission, and you're all set. The goal, again, less violations, more compliance, and less problems. So we can get calls from highway system that say, there's a logging job up here, it is blowing across my road, it's frozen, there's cars sliding over the place. Don't you get regular, don't you have some control over this? And we look to you, but we don't often know about our water because of Number 2, retrofitting. This is a pretty big one. Stormwater retrofitting is the idea of taking a property and making it better for stormwater management in general. If you're disturbing more than 5,000 square feet, you already have to do a stormwater plan for your property. But taking this example right here. So again, I'm going to pick on Steve Vermont. Let's say that's Steve's house, it's a beautiful time of hay, and Steve decides to put a garage. So he is already, if he exceeds 5,000 square feet of disturbance, he's already required to do a stormwater permit and address stormwater from that addition. So that's already on the books. What we're asking in the new regs is if Steve is going to improve his property and he has to address stormwater here, let's ask him to address stormwater from the rest of the house. And let's try to make that property as stormwater neutral as we can, because that was the original intent, Article 43 in 1987. That said the goal is let's have our development be as minimally impacting after the fact as it was before they developed it. How do we get there? If this house was built prior to 1990, 99% chance there's no stormwater controls. I've spent 25 years in this watershed where the guy just below this guy has been complaining because this guy is bleeding water onto his property and I'm going to sue him or I'm going to sue you for not doing anything. And I have heard that for years. And what this will help do is say, all right, I'm fixing my property up a little bit. Let's put a few $1,000s into fixing the stormwater runoff issues from the rest of the house. How do we do that? We have very simple practices that are out there, easily understood, don't need level of engineering, don't need HydroCAD. You want to come in and take a look at simple infiltration bases, dry wells, infiltration chambers. Very low cost and very good impact for benefit. What is a minor stormwater project? Anything that is between 5,000 square feet of disturbance and 15,000 square feet of disturbance. This you have to do today. Here's what we're proposing. As part of that project, you work to infiltrate stormwater from the remaining portion of that property that's impervious. It's going to actually add a little bit of extra work for that person to make it stormwater neutral. But if you have a difficult site, if you can't get a lot of stormwater on the ground, the minimum will be a ½ inch of rain, trying to get in the ground. So that's basically the first flush rule. If you can catch the first flush of runoff from your property, you catch about 80% of the theoretically that are coming off of that property. However, we do have some difficult parts in the Lake George watershed, right? This is Royal Anchorage in the town of Putnam. There are some difficult sites. This is one that we just approved not long ago. Very difficult to do a stormwater retrofit here. If that landowner can prove, say, listen, I can't physically do stormwater runoff on the existing part of my property, can I get a waiver for this? And Joe and myself and the town code enforcement officer has the ability to say, you know what, that makes sense, you can't do it, here's your waiver from that point. So that's what we're looking at right now. And from our perspective, this change, although seemingly fairly small, over time, this is the long game, right? So it's not going to change in a year, but if we're looking at 10 years, 20 years, where people are actually improving their properties, and it's happening all over the Lake George Park, if we're asking them to make their property more stormwater neutral, that is ultimately going to change the game for Lake George. Okay, number 3, stormwater setbacks for better projects. So everything that we're doing in this whole project, we're trying to base it on any level of science that we can find. We could find no science that said you need a 100-foot lateral setback distance from residential stormwater runoff to go in Lake George. Why do we have 100 feet? Well, at the time, somebody said they want to be 100 feet back because that was simply synonymous with the separation distances between wells and stormwater, wastewater, all that kind of thing. Somebody thought 100 feet. We can't find any real reason that your stormwater needs to be all the way back here at 100 feet when APA says you can build your house 50 feet back. So how do you use stormwater 50 feet back up? Your house is larger. So what we proposed is a 35-foot setback, and that allows all this extra room in here to do better stormwater practices. There's a lot of engineers, Joe works on every single day, that are doing gyrations to figure out how to get stormwater to meet that setback without having to go in front of our commissioners for variance. And we simply can't find any science that says, you know what, we're already worse off with stormwater infiltration 35 feet than 100 feet. So we're proposing to loosen up that regulation and allow a lot more flexibility for the design community to do better stormwater projects. So pretty straightforward. Stream buffers. Okay, so some of you folks were around back in 2007 to 2009. The commission had proposed a 100-foot stream setback. There's 2 zones. First 50 foot was basically the one back down, and the outer 50 feet, you could do various things in there. And, you know, went through the whole process. And I think there wasn't a great public understanding of what the commission was proposing, and a lot of people got pretty upset about taking these as a project. Have you validated the science, and is this too much? And actually, I tell this story every now and then. You know, my chairman asked me, what do you think about the stormwater, the stream buffers at the time, the stream corridors? In my interview down in Albany, that was the one question they asked me, what do you think about stream corridors and what the commission did? I said, I think they should have done more outreach. I think they should have really taken a hard look at the science. The idea was great because a bigger buffer benefits more things. It benefits wildlife, borders, benefits fisheries, cooling for the stream. But what we're looking at now is stormwater protection. So a full stream corridor effort is one thing. What we're looking to do is improve stormwater protection for Lake George. And that's what we're looking at. So we spent gobs of time looking at every possible study that we could find. And some of these are studies of studies of studies. This one right here evaluated over 150 studies. This one is 130. And so we're going to find every buffer study that we can find on the planet. We're going to find out what they said. And they came out with recommendations and said, these are the studies that are most pertinent to what we're looking at. And here's the setback distances that we think make sense from a stormwater perspective. And what we found is we think we can do a pretty good job at a buffer distance of 35 feet. So it's about a third of what the commission had proposed back in the day, but we're still getting, you probably can't read this, we're still getting removal efficiencies of phosphorus anywhere between 50 and 70%. And if you couple those improvements with what we're already doing on site for the stormwater requirements, we think this goes a long way in helping protect our streams and protecting the water quality for Lake George. So what are the provisions that we're looking at? Here's the proposal. This is the diagram from the Adirondack Park Agency. We're looking to apply the Adirondack Park Agency stream cutting standards to, shoreline cutting standards to streams in Lake George Park. We're going to talk about what a stream is in a minute. Within 35 feet of the stream bank, no more than 30% of the trees larger than 6-inch diameter may be cut. The big trees, we max out at taking 30% of the trees. What about the underbrush? You want to clear the underbrush? You can clear the vast majority of the underbrush there. And that was one of the conversations that we had with the local gentleman from Bolton. So if people want access to their streams, you need to do something with this, and there was a point, because we did follow-up research, that says a grass buffer isn't as good as the forested buffer, but it still has a good phosphorus removal benefit, so why not take some of that out? If it's a benefit to the land, it's not functional for them. So, however, within 6 feet of shore, no more than 30% of the stream bank limit can be cleared of vegetation. So that's a little complicated, so we try to make, let me go one more thing, impervious areas. We're trying to keep impervious areas out of the buffer. However, somebody wants to put a 10 by 10 concrete patio out there to sit and watch a stream, that's allowed. If they want to do 400 feet, that's a pervious hardscape, say a bluestone and backfilled with pea gravel, that's considered a hardscape that's pervious. Goes up to 400 square feet, which is pretty considerable. Not a deck, that's a 20 by 20 patio that you have right down the stream, so that's going to be allowed under the current proposal. So let me give you just a quick example diagram. So let's say this is your house, and this is our 35-foot stream buffer. And let's say, for example's sake, you have 10 large trees over 6 inches diameter. What can you do to manage yourself within that buffer? What you can do is take 3 of those 10 trees, let's say it's 100 feet long, you can take 3 of those large 10 trees out, and you can take 30% of essentially all vegetation within that 100 feet. That is the APA shoreline cutting standard. It is understood by all municipal codes people, understood by the town boards, and it's an established code that's been in place for a long time. We're simply applying it to streams. This allows people to access their streams in a reasonable fashion. We're not saying build your house in the stream buffer. We're trying to keep structures out of that buffer. But it allows a very reasonable level of stream cutting within those corridors. What is a stream? I happen to be the guy that worked in our office back in the day to develop the stream coverage maps for the Lake George Park Commission. And by God, it was the most comprehensive stream coverage ever done for New York State. And to God, that's a true story. However, people were concerned, how far does it go up? Where is it exactly? All these types of things. How do I access that? So we eliminated that conversation and said, you know what a stream is? A stream is a DEC stream done. A DEC stream coverage, Mark Miller from DEC will tell you, is not comprehensive. It is not the full network of streams in the Lake George Park. However, it covers the vast majority of the significant perennial streams in the Lake George Park. Is this a very good first cut? Absolutely. So if Steve Vermont wants to say, I have no idea if there's a stream in my property, here's what Steve does. He goes on to Google on his phone in 30 seconds, types in the streams. He's going to come up with a web page. He's going to click on the environmental resource map, exactly where the stream is on his property. And if there's no stream on your property, you have no stream on your property. And if it stops halfway up your property, that's exactly where it stops. There's no question. There's no, well, do we administer it different by municipality? Is it administered different on grades? Where does the stream stop? Is there a bed and banks issue? No. If it is on this DEC environmental stream mapper, it's a stream. If it is not, it is not. We can't make it any clearer than that. There's a lot of people that say, this is only half of the streams of the park, you're giving away the farm. And others are saying, this is good because it provides a level of comfort and consistency that we didn't have in days past. It made it very good compromise. Is it reasonable? So I was at, as many of you people were at, I was in the audience that you guys were listening to some of the meltdown of the many people that showed up at the stream corridor regulations that are some very valid points back in the day. Is this reasonable? And that's a question that was asked back in the day. We think we're at a pretty reasonable point in our stream buffer regulations. It is established, well understood shoreline cutting standard by local towns, residents. People know this standard. It's easy to apply. It is on the low side. Make no mistake, 35 feet is on the very low side of stream buffers, looking at buffer protections for the whole gamut of what you do buffers for. However, this is a stormwater regulation. We're looking at stormwater, so we're looking at phosphorus, sediment, and nitrogen. And we think we can do pretty well with 35 feet. The town of Bolton already administers this exact standard, and they have for many years. So we asked, has the sky fallen in the town of Bolton? Is it chaos in the streets? They said, no, it's not. We administer it. The town of Queensbury is years past us. The town of Queensbury, you're 35 feet, you don't touch it. There's no cutting, there's no structures, there's no anything. If you're 35 feet to a stream, that is that buffer. And if you're going to do something in that buffer, you need to get a variance from the planning board. If you do something, you're going to replant that land. So we're not there. We don't think that's where we want to be right now, because again, we're looking at this as a stormwater practice, and we think we can do very well with what we have. But 2 towns in the basin already exceed what we're proposing to do. Okay, fertilizer restrictions. The last one is fairly straightforward. We're looking at no fertilizer applications within 50 feet of a water body or wetland. Okay, fairly straightforward. This will help reduce phosphorus and nitrogen from lawn. Pretty common sense, right? If you're out there fertilizing your lawn and you get what we got yesterday, which was 1.5 inches of rain in half an hour, those nutrients are migrating off of the surface of your lawn into the liquid. And there's no shortage of evidence showing that all these large lawns are washing nutrients into the lake because we have massive algae and technology off of a lot of the larger properties that have large lawns. So I don't have a specific study to say X, Y, Z, this is what it's looking at, but anecdotally, having swam miles and miles in Lake George and noticed this thing, it's absolutely true, and that's been validated by the Agricultural Institute and a number of others. So, this law already exists in Queensbury and Lake George. It's been in place for 7 years in Queensbury, 4 years in Lake George. So we called. We said, hey, Craig Brown, town of Queensbury, what do you think about this regulation? Does this make sense for you? Do you get huge kickback? Do you have any compliance issues? How do you possibly enforce something like this? We had a good half-hour conversation with him, and he says for commercial applicators, it makes a lot of sense. They have to pay attention. They're at risk of losing their ability to operate in the town of Queensbury if they have repeated violations. So they're on board with it. Plus the fact that they understand the benefit of doing so. And so what about the private people? The guy that's just out there pushing a little Scott's spreader. He says, well, we have less of a handle on that, but there's been a pretty good outreach machine by not only the town board and the planning board, but also by the local citizens that find this important. And they're getting a lot of complaints, at least according to Craig, a lot of complaints about people violating this 50-foot setback for fertilizers. Talked to Dan Baruch, Town Lake George, at the same time. Totally separate conversations. We didn't tell him anything about what Craig said. He came back with almost the exact same response. So from their perspective, it's not something they chase on a regular basis. They do follow complaints, and they have outreach to all the commercial applicators saying, if you're working in the town of George, this is the same. And that's what we plan on doing with our application. Next steps, our attorney, Carla, just kind of went through where we are in much more detail, but this is what we're looking at. A few extra public information meetings, and that's carrying through September. At this stage, we're going to be in early October by the time we can do an actual hearing. This is not our ideal time frame. We've been a little behind the 8 ball and trying to get some things out to the public. Working with both Lake George and Queensbury to amend their local law. They administer our stormwater jurisdiction. So to do so, they have to adopt local laws that are similar to our regulations. That's a whole other process. They have to have their public hearings, public outreach meetings, and they have to rewrite their laws to accommodate where we are. So we've been working with their attorneys to see what kind of time frame we're on, and I think we're on a path that makes sense. And implement in 2019, the original goal was January 19. I think the commission can pull off its regulations by January 19. The towns are going to take a little bit longer because when we're done, they need to start that process. So that's it in a nutshell. This presentation will be on our website as soon as Justin can get back to the office and pop on and stick it there. We have an old one on there right now. And also, we have a 4-page summary of those 5 things that we're looking at. That's been on our website for over a year. Nothing has really changed. We've modified a few tweaks here and there based on some good public feedback, but that's pretty much what we're on. So with that, it goes back to the chairman to kind of take your questions. Myself and Joe Dillon, who administers our stormwater program, are going to answer any questions you have to the best of our ability. So this isn't a public hearing. Our job is, if you have a question, we're going to take as much time as we can to answer it. And if you have good ideas, whether it's here today or come into the office, we want to hear them because we want the best time program we can get. So thank you for coming. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Dave. Is there anyone here in the audience now that wants to say something? We're wide open again. You can make any. This lady's already jumped up with that, but you'll be next. Thank you.
I don't have it in question form, but I do have some concerns typed up, and if you don't mind, if I just take a couple minutes?
Sure.
I won't take as long as you guys have already. So,
You're not going to read all that.
contrary to the chairman's earlier statement, I have read the information. It was on the website prior, and I found it and saved it last year, and I am against it. I won't waste your time with a lot of facts, and I'm just going to read it because it'll be a lot quicker, and I'll forget half of it if I don't. I will offer a couple of examples of how the proposed changes would negatively impact existing properties and how these proposed regulations will make any improvements to existing properties prohibited due to the unnecessary additional cost created. Applying shoreline cutting standards to DEC classified streams. They state that a vast array of scientific studies conclude that natural vegetated stream buffers provide significant nutrient reduction and benefits to stormwater runoff. Contradicted in studies that used to be on your website, the backup for all the studies that were put on the record in 2009 at the public hearing. Those are no longer on your website. They're really great information. There's a lot of great studies on there, which weren't included in this presentation just now. I'm sorry, I lost my place. In a matter to confuse, the director states that they are implementing the long-accepted APA cutting standards to New York State DEC regulated streams throughout the Lake George watershed. He neglects to tell you one important fact. The existing APA law impacts only those properties on navigable lakes, streams, and ponds. The Lake George Park Commission proposed changes would extend those restrictions to properties that are not on navigable streams and waterways, if they are DEC regulated streams. That is a major change and would negatively impact many more taxpayers and their private property rights within the Lake George Basin. As stated in the RPO, State of the Lake 30-year study, that the existing regulations are working have been since the 80s, and that no further regulation is needed until the studies are completed. Number 4, stormwater retrofitting for minor project application. The director states the overall quality of Lake George continues to decline, even with the Lake George Park Commission's stormwater regulations. This sentiment is inaccurate based on the RPI's conclusion of a 30-year study. More regulations to retrofit existing private property, which represents only 5% of the basin, will solve absolutely nothing. Asking the state and municipalities to fix the maximum extent practicable the existing highways runoff would accomplish something, 95% of the runoff. Another example of how item 4 would negatively and financially impact taxpayers who own existing residences throughout the Lake George Basin. Again, you mentioned the goal hasn't changed. No net new discharge. New discharge. Right now, all major projects of 15,000 square feet or more mitigate stormwater from the developed portion of their property. They are proposing to reduce that threshold to include minor projects, which now do not fall under such restriction. Let me give you an example so that you can see just how outrageous and unnecessary these proposed change is and how it would negatively and financially impact every parcel owner in the entire watershed that ever wanted to do at least the least little improvement to their private property. This change would now affect any project exceeding 5,000 square feet of land disturbance or 1,000 feet of new impervious area and will require stormwater management retrofitting to eliminate discharges from the pre-existing grandfathered home. Even if all they wanted to do was add a garage or a storage shed or just pave their driveway. As the law is written today, a minor project does not fall under such outreaching regulation, and it should remain that way. An example, today under existing regulation, a property owner that wants to improve the property by adding a 2-car garage, 25 feet by 40 feet, 1,000 feet of new impervious area, can go to the planning and zoning officer and get a permit, spend $20,000 on material and labor, and have a new garage, improve his property and protect his investment and his automobile. Under the Lake George Park Commission proposed change, this minor project becomes a major headache. If this law passed, the property owner would be required to provide for stormwater management that comply with the design requirements and performance standards that are now only required for major projects of 15,000 feet or more. The cost would be prohibitive for such a small project. Instead of being able to just go to the town planner and receive a permit, the owner will now have to the expense of an engineer to design a stormwater plan, site plan review, public hearing, expense of a surveyor to try and survey a location on the existing developed property where the engineered stormwater facility can be located, expense of application for site plan and public hearing, expense of attorney hired to represent property owner, public hearing, expense of installing the stormwater infrastructure. As a result, the $20,000 garage improvement to the taxpayer's house would cost him upwards of $30,000, 50% increase. If these unnecessary regulations were to be adopted, for what? For absolutely nothing. Every homeowner in the basin could add 1,000 square feet of impervious area to their existing property or disturb 5,000 square feet without any stormwater control, without negatively impacting any stream or lake or pond. In addition, requiring retrofitting to existing projects that have vested rights that grandfather the existing homes from having to meet regulations that are passed after they were built is unconstitutional, and we will not allow the idea to even be considered for one moment. The Lake George Park Commission Director and Commissioner are not elected officials and therefore should not be proposing anything that would infringe on the taxpayers' constitutional private property rights. Remember, the existing goal is no net new discharge. A major concern is that these proposed regulations are similar to the regulations proposed by the Lake George Park Commission in 2009. The regulations pushed by the fund who donated a boat in 2008. I don't know what the taxpayers have to donate to have their property rights protected and the Constitution followed. That was an ad lib, I'm sorry. The Lake George Park Commission Director has not offered a red line form so that we can see exactly what the proposed changes are. He has not offered how the definitions and maps are changed, which all have a major effect on the generalized proposed changes. RPI's 30-year study, State of the Lake, has indicated that existing regulations are working and that no new regulations are necessary, at least until the study is complete. The study found that the primary stress on the lake have not changed how the lake functions. Number one in the conclusion was salt concentrations nearly tripled in the last 30 years. Sustained increase of salt loading to Lake George pose a gathering threat to the lake's ecological health. The state highways are the cause, not the property owners. Until the state and municipalities control the major runoff from the highways, everything else would be a waste of time and taxpayers' money and accomplish absolutely nothing. There's no scientific proof of need and therefore no need for any further regulation. In fact, just the opposite exists. Proof that RPI's 30-year study, State of the Lake, has indicated that existing regulations are working, that no new regulations are necessary. It also states in the conclusion that the 33% increase in chlorophyll associated with phytoplankton over the past 3 decades remains unclear. The study indicated a gradually increasing phosphorus loading associated with trophic cascade effects associated with rainbow smelt stocking as a potential important factor. So the state stocked the lake with smelt 30 or 40 years ago, and that could be causing the increase in phosphorus. I mean, understanding how these factors interact, this is still part of their study, understanding how these factors interact to cause the observed changes could improve management of the lake considerably. Future research and monitoring efforts should focus on improving that understanding. In addition, the Lake George Park Commission already has existing stormwater regulation, and it hasn't been 20 years since they were reviewed, as indicated. The Commission's stormwater management regulations, enacted as required by Article 43, are designed to prevent any increase in stormwater runoff from any development in order to reduce flooding, siltation, and stream bank erosion. They are all designed to prevent any increase in pollution caused by stormwater runoff from development, which would otherwise degrade the quality of the water of Lake George and its tributaries and render it unfit for human consumption. Therefore, with water-based recreation or adversely affect aquatic life. And the picture you showed of, I think, English Brook or the Delta, what used to happen years ago is you allowed property owners who owned property that had a stream going through it, they allowed them to dredge it. So that silt and sediment never made it to the lake. Now they don't allow them to do that, and I mean, the old timers knew what to do to protect the lake. Obviously not today. Unfortunately, most people do not care or just do not understand about the direction that extreme environmentalists are trying to take, not only the watershed, but this country. Too many people take freedom for granted. I will fight with the facts and strive to keep us free. The waterkeeper of the Fund of Lake George appears to be on a quest to stop all lakeside, hillside, upland, roadside, well, pretty much all building in the Lake George Basin. The same person who lives in the town of Hague and applied for and received 2 variances on his property located on ledge across Route 9 from the lake. 1 variance for 2 septics on his small lot to serve 2 lots. As to stormwater control on his property located above Lake George, as an engineer, the waterkeeper confirmed that a swale would be sufficient to control the stormwater runoff. If it is good enough for the waterkeeper engineer, whose property is located just across the road from the lake, it is good enough for everyone. That's all.
Thank you.
May I ask you a question?
I'm sorry?
When you said that back in the day they dredged these streams and there was no silt or any runoff, when they dredged them, would you explain that a little bit more to me? And you said that worked perfectly?
It's in the backup from 2009. It's on your website.
Pardon me?
I'm sure they can find it. It's in the backup from 2009.
Yeah. So you're saying that when they opened up the streams and the water was caused to flow at a higher velocity, that the silt and the sediment didn't go with it?
They used to dredge, probably making a pond, like a retention pond.
Oh, okay. You didn't say that. That's okay.
So that it would catch the sediment and they would empty that out.
Oh, okay. That's what I meant.
So that it would make it. But and they mentioned in the article about July 4th or something in the Post-Star, I think it was about the 303D list. Any AA stream is on the 303D list just because it's a AA stream. When they first put it on the DEC 303D list in 2002, proposed by DEC to put Lake George and some of its tributaries on that list. LGA supported the inclusion of Lake George and some of its tributaries. They submitted the written comment letter. So at that point, you could just write a letter and ask to have it put on. And the reason they did it is then they could get grants from the state to dredge those deltas. But I don't know why the state isn't allowing them to dredge the deltas anymore. The 303D list, there was no decreased oxygen problems, no chemical problems, no PCB problems. It was just silt and sediment. At the request of LGA, 2 additional brooks were added, East Brook and Prospect Mountain. It seems as if they were included in the impaired list by someone just requesting it. Then grants can be applied to cover the cost of dredging the natural deltas that form naturally over time. These deltas form where there is developed and where there is little or no development. Therefore, the proposed regulations will not stop its natural process. This was on the record in 2009. There are concerns for boat safety, and they can be dredged periodically to keep them under control. But they have been a problem forever. The positive effects of the stormwater regulations that went into effect in the 1990s should begin to help, because if they work. I mean, maybe they don't work. Maybe none of the stormwater regulations work. If they've been in process since 1990, and here it is 2018, and you have bigger deltas than you ever had. It is stated in 303D list that the cause is urban storm erosion. So if in fact stormwater regulations actually do work, we should see results. So with the sound recommendations from LGA, we are included in 303D list. Deltas are a natural phenomenon. Because I'm not a scientist or a professional engineer or an executive director of any environmental organization, I will back those facts up with words in the English Brook Assessment, Watershed Assessment of September 2008. I think that's one of the studies you had up there. Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District and contributions by Darren Freshwater Institute, the Fund for Lake George, Don Kepler Stream Assessment, page 21, paragraph 2, states English Brook is one of the largest tributaries of Lake George and maintains a network of over 13 miles of channel in its many branches. The headwaters of English Brook and its tributaries run through undisturbed forests and are considered in pristine condition. However, as in any channel, there are a number of locations, even within these undisturbed areas, that evidence undercut banks and minor stream bank erosion. This is a natural process and merits no restorative considerations. Also, this natural process is confirmed on the FGEIS for the Lake George Delta Sediment Management Shoreline Restoration Project prepared by the LGA in December 2003. The geological nature of the lake and its watershed is the result of geological origins of the lake and has likely been relatively unchanged since the most recent glacier advances 10,000 to 20,000 years ago. It goes on to say sedimentation deltas occur naturally whenever the velocity of moving sediment-laden water is reduced, such as occurs when the fast-flowing tributary discharges into a more quiescent water body. Since sediment deposit is a natural occurring process, sediment deltas most likely have always occurred in Lake George, with tributary brooks discharging into the lake. Just all these facts went around the record in 2009. It's all the same stuff, and I love how he described everything. It sounded like it wasn't going to affect anybody. It's going to affect a lot. It's going to cost a lot of money, and the state would never do that because the cost is too much. Thank you for your time.
So, Mr. Chairman, to answer Kathy's question, a couple of that, I wrote that report that you just read, and I also designed and installed all the in-stream sediment ponds that you're talking about. The sediment ponds were put in place to control the excess sediment coming down the channel from both upland sources and from natural sources. They were an attempt to control the growth of the deltas. They were all approved by Mark Migliori at DEC. And that was an attempt to address a symptom of the problem. And the DEC still allows dredging of deltas, but they are so uncostly to do that they simply haven't been done in ways. And I can give you an entire dissertation on the creation of the English Brook Delta at any point you want to sit down and talk about it, because I spent 20 years studying it, working with old DOT people and everybody else. So as I've offered before, Dawn, I would love to sit down and have a couple-hour conversation with you on all of this stuff at any time of your convenience.
Thank you, Dave. Is there anyone else that wants to talk? No.
My name's Kathy Parker, live in the town of Cape, I'm also the zoning enforcement officer. Under the stream stormwater retrofit, my concern is basically if somebody wants to put a small covered stream-in porch, 20 by 20, let's say I'll take my property, I have 1,100 square foot footprint of my house built in 1972. The lot is 80% sand. I really don't have an erosion problem. I don't have, it pools up in one area. The minute it stops raining, it's down. I have put a little basin in it. But let's say down the road, I want a 12 by 12 or 20 by 20 screened-in porch added to that house. I have the money to build that. I have the money to get a building permit. I may not have enough money to retrofit the whole house and complete the project. What I'm asking is if you considered an exemption for minimal size projects under the stormwater retrofit. I'm fortunate my soil is sand. It won't need much for stormwater devices, but there are properties that don't have a well-perking soil. Their stormwater retrofits are going to be more costly and perhaps being engineered because they may be in a clay base. We do have several areas that are clay base. So that's 12 by 12 covered porch. It's going to get very, very expensive and costly to the point they may not be able to do their project. So you haven't gained anything. The existing house still doesn't have stormwater. They don't have their covered porch or a small garage that they might want. So there's no win-win on that because it may turn into a cost-prohibitive project if the whole house, the pre-existing house, must be retrofitted with stormwater. So I'm asking if you consider an exemption for small projects, and I am, or a cost cap on these devices. I do like the one that happened where it was impractical. We do have zoning. Lake Shore Park Commission does do our stormwater for us, but we do have planning and zoning. All house replacements projects in critical environmental areas that don't befit your stormwater permit. Our planning and zoning board are going to make sure the condition is to implement stormwater design on the critical environmental areas and house replacement. My one concern, more so than the existing houses, are the roadways. The DOT, now that Governor Cuomo is on bandwagon for Allentown, why isn't the DOT required on all the drainage pipes all along the state highways to put in catch basins that are sized properly for the sand and the salt that's dumped on those highways all winter? All along Route 9A and Route 8. There are maybe 6 catch boxes to catch heavy sediment. The rest are direct pipes either going directly into streams, directly into Lake George, or a very small overland corridor on the exit pipe of that drain into Lake George. The sand and sediment are huge. Haybrook is an example. All along Route 8, there's just pipes. So all the sand and salt that's dumped on Route 8 and Route 9 all the way along has a direct corridor. And our gal said is proof of that, as well as the upland land that keeps growing. But I won't go on. But I do think that the stormwater retrofit for all pre-existing houses, no matter how small the project is, would place an undue hardship on our property owners and myself. One thing I do uphold, I do have 2 properties that are on Hay Brook. They are stream front. I think you're cutting, and I was part of the initial Lake Shore Park Commission Stream Corridor Protection Committee. I think that's reasonable as a stream owner. I think you're cutting restrictions. I apply it all the time on the shoreline. It still gives the property owner access to their stream, a view shed to their stream. Yeah, I think it will protect, because right now we can't protect development on the streams except for septic.
Thank you. Anyone else? Steve?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to switch subjects for a second. Is that okay?
Yeah, you know what, Steve, I was just going to close this up and give you, I knew you wanted to say something. I'm going to have public comment, okay? I just want to close this down unless you want to talk about this. No, I will not skip you in the public comments. Sir?
My name is Josh Pasher with the town of Hay. So, I'm all for the protection of the lake. I mean, my family business, we depend on lake quality and just the preservation of the lake. I have a couple of questions, and I'm hoping we can maybe just trade responses. So, with this new, just so I understand it properly, with the new stormwater regulations, let's just say you have a couple of houses, and then that exceeds, you have an impervious surface that exceeds the threshold of minor. Will that require the engineer, or will they work with us, like Mr. Doing and whatnot, to develop a stormwater plan to retrofit the property.
Yeah, I think, Dave, you want to answer that? It's simple.
I think the idea is we have that stormwater design manual for minor projects. That's going to be a key player. What I would like to see is what I used to do back in the day at Soil and Water. You come on in, we say, let's calculate your stormwater, figure it out. You have 500 cubic feet of stormwater you need to deal with. Here's the different ways to do it. Talk about costs, talk about how you get them in the ground. Absolutely. I think that's our job, to be a resource for exactly those types of things. Kathy mentioned, or maybe it was Dawn, getting into engineering costs, survey costs, all that stuff. That was never the intent of this, nor is there any requirement for what we're looking at for miners right now to have an engineer sign off on traditional systems that really don't have a level of complexity. So we'd be more than happy to sit down if you have a project that would meet this standard. Love to go out to the site, talk about it, and get something that works.
Right. Well, you sort of already answered my question. I'm asking like more. I know on a new property, if you exceed that minor threshold, then yes, you're major. You have to do all those things with the, the engineering and whatnot, and survey, topographical, all that stuff. But like, you have a property and then you want to apply to build, let's just say, 1,000 square foot garage, and you have 3 houses and a driveway, and it breaks because you have no stormwater, and then you break that threshold. Do you require an engineer because you have to make your property stormwater neutral, and because your other 3 houses or 3 garages or whatever the case is break that threshold? Are you going to be just considered major, thrown into that category, and then required to go out and get a comprehensive plan from an engineer that would design that for you at an additional cost?
No, so project classification is minor or major based on the project you're undertaking, so in this case the garage, regardless of how much pre-existing development or the scope of the development on the site. So take, Trout House or for instance, there's a lot of development there, which if you're building brand new, all of that would be a major. But if you're going to put in a 1,000 square foot garage, that's a minor, and so we would look at it as a minor. And actually all the design standards for retrofits, the only design standard is that 1.5 inch volume, so there's no vertical separation, horizontal separation. So all the things that would generally require a design professional aren't required for retrofits. It's really just a best management practice. What can we do to improve the property? So it would really be something, walking around the site with me, Roger, Dave, and looking at the site. And it would still be a minor.
So you wouldn't consider the retrofit part of what you would bump you into major or minor?
No,
So
just the project.
The retrofit would be a separate something that you could just go out and hire somebody or do it yourself.
Exactly.
Try to implement that standard.
Yep.
Implement the stormwater control measures.
Yep.
Would you consider, being in the best interest of the lake, hiring somebody to come on your staff full-time that would literally just be a stormwater advocate that would help people design plans that live on Graphite Mountain, that live in areas of hay that really, consider somebody that would help us generate plans. Like right now, if I apply for a permit, you're just going to tell me this is what you need to do, you're going to send me the remarks back, we're going to trade back and forth. But wouldn't it be nice if you guys could somehow find it in the budget to say, hey, let's have somebody on our staff that, I don't know, I'll just throw out a number, $50,000 a year. And now all of a sudden, I can come and apply and you can help me develop a plan. I'm not going to pretend to know what. I struggle with the whole stormwater concept and how to draw the plan. I think it's a difficult thing for the average person. But, it seems like, we hear about all these big numbers and millions of dollars that we're just throwing into the lake and doing these studies. We're talking about $50,000 that, the person that lives directly on the lake that doesn't want to do that and he just wants to hire the engineer, man, that's a wonderful thing that he can do that. But I think for a guy that has a house up on Graphite Mountain, if I want to come and go through and you can literally sit down with me and just say, Josh, let's get you a plan. And let's really I'll help you draw it. And then all of a sudden I go and see an excavator guy that can help me implement it. Isn't that what we're trying to achieve? And why aren't we trying to move in that direction instead of just putting it on us? Like, let's go out, do this, this is what you need to do, I want you to draw it this way, we're going to send it to our consulting outfit, and they're going to go ahead and send you these things back and send it to me. these are the proactive ways I would like to see our lake get better. And I would really ask this commission to taking the buck stops here approach, rather than just putting it on the public.
I agree with you, and there's 1, 2, where's Molly? Molly, 3, 4 people on staff, and especially Joe and Molly and Roger, that's their job, is to sit there. I've seen them draw out plans for people. It's just, yeah, it's exactly what you said. Yeah, you're not, I don't have the expertise to draw up a plan. You don't have it. They have it. They've got advanced degrees in hydrology. They know how to draw it up for you. Yeah, that help is there already. Could we use more? Yeah, right. Anybody. Tell them, yeah, we could use more. We're severely limited in our staff, and we try to do the best we can. And I think Joe, Roger, they'll all. I've seen Molly draw up plans for docks and boathouses and everything else to help people out. So that help is already there. All you have to do is ask for it. Okay?
I wasn't under the influence that you guys would actually help with the plans.
Yeah.
And I'm more asking for, even if somebody has a plan that breaks that threshold, can you help us develop that plan? Can you help us figure out the vegetation? I don't know. I feel that I've spoken with Mr. Doohan and Mr. Wick before, and it's never been.
Yeah, you know what? There's another gentleman sitting there I just happened to think. The Lake George Association. These guys draw up plans for everybody. I mean, there is help out there. Matter of fact, I'd be very upset if these guys wouldn't sit down and help you draw up a plan. I would expect it just like you do.
Help is there, then
It's there. The help is there.
Maybe I've just been misinformed.
Yeah, that's probably true.
I think your previous project, Josh, was a major, and we don't get involved in designing majors because it goes into a much greater level of detail that we just don't have the ability or staff time to do. But if you're talking about coming in for an addition like Kathy was talking about, and you have X amount of stormwater you need to handle, that's not a complicated thing, and we could sit down and draw right up. I used to do it for years. Roger can do it, Joe can do it, I can do it. Absolutely.
If I applied for a major and I came down there, you would literally just sit down with me in the office and help me draw this.
For a minor stormwater.
For a minor.
A minor, absolutely.
And I guess I would just add to that conversation that I would like to see this commission take under advisement to possibly hire an advocate to help people with majors that maybe have a property that requires a major, that they just don't have the money to do the surveying. And, I mean, I think I spoke with Mr. Doom before. There's a computer program out there that literally you can get the topographical down to the nearest square inch right off of a computer program. And to Mr. Doom's credit, he has offered that up to me, and he has told me, hey, I'll just email that to you on a thumb drive. And at that point, I didn't even really know what a thumb drive was, but I've since been made aware. But I just would think that it would be in the best interest of the lake, when we hear about the $1 million being spent, to consider people that can't afford a major, that maybe we can come up with the cost that some pre-engineering consulting, I think it somehow could be worked into the budget. But that's just my thoughts. And my last question is, have you ever considered going after stormwater from a point system in terms of your location and grade, in terms of, like, you know, if you're within 500 feet of the lake or whatever it is, or whatever the footage is that the science would say is proper, wouldn't it just make the most sense to say, yeah, those people are in category number 1. We cannot have any stormwater from there on. And then maybe another buffer zone and saying, yeah, maybe they're a little less stringent, but they need good stormwater, but maybe not quite as good as those properties on the lake. And if you're near a stream, I mean, the same type of a concept. It seems like the properties that are around the lake are the ones that are mostly fully developed at this point in time, and then the properties around the mountains are the ones that are not quite as developed as the surrounding lake. So for me, I think it should be more the direction, not just an umbrella policy for how we're going to say, you know, this is the criteria and this is the standard, rather than, are you close to a stream? what is the forest between you and that stream, or the forest between you and that lake? Just in terms of what's directly going into the lake. I mean, for me, if I have a property and I have a couple miles of woods between me and the lake, for me to do stormwater, and you have the science better than me, I don't think I'm hurting the lake as much as somebody that's directly on the lake.
We do that implicitly with the stormwater review. So a few years back, we put a lot of effort into saying, if you have a lawn and then you have woods and there's no nearby water body, you can accept credit for the infiltration in your lawn, you can accept credit for the infiltration in the woods, and in many cases, people don't even have to do proactive stormwater projects. Our goal isn't to put in maintenance-heavy stormwater practices that they have to go through all the time. If you have a property that's going to be stormwater neutral anyway because you live in the sticks and there's nothing around you, you're going to get a letter from the Park Commission that says you're complying with the Commission's stormwater regulations based on these infiltration rates and based on your current property. So that has gone out. That's sheet flow thought went out 2 to 3 years ago. That's the whole intent. It's not let's make sure everybody's under the gun. It's let's take a look at property by property and say, is there any stormwater coming off this property based on this general rate of infiltration and where we are, and then react appropriately. And so we're doing that very proactively to make sure that if you're even a half a mile from the lake, but surrounded by grass and forest all the way around, you evaluate that property, you may not have to do anything. You could be up in the middle 5 miles off, but if your whole property is pavement and slopes right to Hague Brook, that's a challenge that has to be dealt with. So it's really, we have the ability that DEC unfortunately doesn't have. We look at every single application that comes in front of the commission, and we work with that applicant to do the best we can to minimize costs and get the best application on the ground. We do that for every project that crosses our desk, and the towns that we work with and administer those jurisdictions, they have the staff to do the exact same thing, and if they're not comfortable with it, then it comes back to us. So we're at least proactive in doing that, and if there's any questions or problems, that's all Joe does for a living, is stormwater management and marinas, and it has worked pretty well so far, and we want to continue that. If we had the ability to have an extra body in the office, trust me, as a director, I would love that. We don't have the room right now to do that, but we also haven't been overwhelmed to a point where we're not able to address the needs and interests that people are coming in front of us for.
Well, I appreciate the sports time today, but I would just encourage you all to increase resources for people that want help. I mean, you could have made me aware that there's more than I knew, but I think it would be a really good thing to betterment of the lake that just continually increase the resources, free resources for people that need that. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Anyone that hasn't spoken?
Yeah, Steve.
No.
Okay.
No, you're 2 more minutes.
Come on.
I'm getting to you.
I know that. I thought you said Steve. I went, Steve needed a little stand up.
Nobody pick on Steve.
Are we ready for a resolution?
Yes. Would you like to read the resolution so we can get this thing moving?
I've been told I have to. So
Okay.
Can we explain though? Can we explain to them what the resolution is, just so no
Why
one's
don't you?
concerned?
Let's have council say what I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah, but I can say it quick.
So I'm not being sarcastic. Come on.
Quickly, adverb of manner.
One of the processes that I talked about earlier, presenting all of it to the state and then getting the full public comment, the commission has to adopt a resolution which does nothing but authorize Mr. Wick, the chairman, and myself to submit the documents to the state for them to look at, and then they look at it, and then they come back to us and say, publish it, and then talk about it. It does not adopt the regulations. I don't want anybody to be concerned that adopting regulations today. This just says, start the process with the state, move forward.
Okay.
Can I make those words the resolution?
I'd love to start the process.
You can if you want.
Here we go. Subject, amendments to, this is resolution, amendments to 6 NYCRR 64-4 Stormwater Management. Whereas Environmental Conservation Law 430112, effective January 1, 1988, empowers the Lake George Park Commission to adopt rules and regulations for the preparation of local stormwater management plans and stormwater regulatory programs for the purpose of protecting the people. resources, and water quality of the Lake George Park. And whereas 43-0112 specifies that the rules and regulations shall be developed in consultation with the Department of Environmental Conservation, Adirondack Park Agency, and each municipality located in whole or in part within the Lake George Park, and further specifies that the regulations are subject to approval by DEC and APA. And whereas 43-0112 specifies that the regulations and the stormwater management plans and regulatory programs must be designed to prevent any increase in stormwater runoff from any development in order to reduce flooding, siltation, and stream bank erosion, and must be designed to prevent any increase in pollution caused by stormwater runoff from development which would harm or degrade the water quality of the Lake George Park, render Lake George Park unfit for human consumption, interfere with water-based recreation, or adversely affect aquatic life within the Lake George Park, and shall be based on a standard which requires that the total annual volume of surface water runoff from a site during and following development shall not exceed that which prevailed prior to development. And whereas the Commission's regulations at 6 NYCRR 646-4 were adopted August 20th, 1990, and became effective on September 19th, 1990, August 27th, and were thereafter amended in 1998, and whereas the Commission has reviewed 646-4 with the intent of achieving enhanced protection of the water quality of Lake George while balancing the impact on the regulated community. And whereas the Commission has determined it is necessary to amend the current regulations to more adequately reduce existing and future impairments to Lake George quality and clarity. And whereas an agency, prior to submitting a notice of proposed rulemaking for publication in the State Register, must submit the text of the proposed rule and supporting documentation to the Regulatory Reform Unit for determination of whether the proposed rule is complete and in accordance with the goals, criteria, and requirements of the rulemaking process and authority. And whereas the Commission has reviewed the full text of the proposed amendments to 646-4, and whereas the Commission desires to submit the full text and the required State Administrative Procedure Act documents to the Regulatory Reform Unit for review, now therefore be it resolved that the Commission hereby authorize the Chairman, Executive Director, and Council to submit the proposed text of the amendments to 6 NYCRR 646-4 with all supporting documentation as required by SAPA to the Regulatory Review Unit within the New York State Division of Budget for review. And be it further resolved that Chairman, Executive Director, and Council are hereby authorized to make any and all modifications to the proposed amendments to 6 NYCRR 646-4 and documents in support of the proposed amendments as they deem necessary and appropriate, and prepare and file any additional documents requested by the Regulatory Review Unit to permit publication in the State Register. And I would move that, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the Park Commission's submission of the regulations to the state to get them approved again for us to submit to the public. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Carried. Now,
Is it Steve's turn?
Steve, I think you're on.
Steve, I believe you wanted to say something in public comments.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it's a nice thing to hear all the talk earlier and recognizing your officers about safety, preventing accidents, and keeping the lake safe. And with that in mind, I'd like to just mention a few things. First, I'd like to thank Mark and the staff, Jerry from Green Island, for putting lighted channel markers and buoys down the Hague launch makes it a lot safer for the people that are using the beach and getting it out of the launch, and we appreciate that, Mark. Thank you very much. And with that, I also sent a lot of you a picture that I took on Aces Island about 10 days ago. I was there in the morning, about 6:30 with a friend of ours, Al Ryder, you all know, and we're looking east, and all of a sudden something caught my eye. I'm looking, that's that. Here I saw a yellow flag before I saw the kayak coming across as we were looking into the rising sun. And I think safety along this lines needs to be addressed. We've talked about that before, and I think really a time has come now to take maybe a few steps forward to try and keep the lake safe. I know we've had a couple accidents on the lake, and some very serious, people running into kayaks, and I think we can address that issue. In fact, you know, being visible in a kayak, or even I have a friend that has a go-kart, they put flags on for their kids riding in the street so people would see them, so they're more visible, they won't get hurt. So with that, I'm going to hand out just a couple pictures of a couple of kayaks I took today on my computer and the price of a kayak. Plus, I'm going to follow it up with a kayak flag. And here's, let me just get this to Mark starting out. It's not the best computer, but here's one for $349. Here's one here that costs almost $1,800. And they're very hard to see. We've all said that many times on the lake. You can't see with a 1-foot chop. Here for $40, less than 10% the cost of a kayak. You can get a flag with a light on it. So I really believe that you guys are the regulatory agency for the lake. The Marine Patrol does a great job. And for safety, I think it's time that we address this issue, save lives, prevent accidents with something as simple